It gladdens me to know that Odin prepares for a feast. The Aesir will welcome me. My death comes without apology. And I welcome the Valkyries to summon me home.
The leaders of the Democratic Party have now decided that 74 million Trump voters weren't just wrong or misguided. They didn't simply back the wrong guy or have incorrect opinions or fail to see the obvious truths. No, the threat they pose is graver and more serious than that, more dangerous. These 74 million Trump voters are, in fact, terrorists. They're a looming physical threat to the rest of us, and we must deal with them in the way that you deal with threats like that, existential threats to the nation. Saddam Hussein, al-Baghdadi, Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump's voters. For years, they told us this country had been infiltrated by Russian spies, but now we know it's worse than that. The real threat, the actual enemy, is within. In the end, it always is. 74 million deviationists lurk in our midst. They look like normal people, but ladies and gentlemen, do not be deceived. They are Trotskyites. They're wreckers, kulaks. We must root them out. It'll take a war to do that, an actual war, a war on our own people. To make that point as clear as possible, the Democratic Party has marshaled military leaders to deliver the news. They're the party's spokesman now. General Stanley McChrystal is among them. McChrystal, in case you don't remember, is the strategic genius who can take credit, if you can call it that, for running the longest losing war in American history, the one in Afghanistan, the war that's still going. Yesterday, McChrystal took a break from collecting fat corporate directors' fees to note that, based on his extensive experience mismanaging America's foreign policy, Trump voters look an awful lot like terrorists, an awful lot. Quote, I did see a similar dynamic in the evolution of al-Qaeda in Iraq, McChrystal said, where a whole generation of angry Arab youth with very poor prospects followed a powerful leader who promised to take them back to a time, to a better place, and he led them to embrace an ideology that justified their violence. This is now happening in America. Al-Qaeda in America. Thanks, Stan. Sometime when you can manage to spare a moment from getting rich from your failures in America's decline, we'd love to know exactly what did happen in Afghanistan. What went wrong there, when you have time? Until then, though, Andy McCabe would like to put a finer point on the matter. You remember Andy McCabe. He's the former high-level FBI official who was canned for lying and corruption, a model federal employee. So when Andy McCabe speaks, you can hear the moral authority in his voice, gravelly and resonant like cigarette smoke. You're going to want to listen carefully to what Andy McCabe has to say. According to Andy McCabe's considered judgment, Donald Trump's voters are very much like ISIS. Listen to this.
When we looked at those Americans who traveled to Syria for the purpose of joining the Islamic State, when you put all those faces and names down in one place, you had doctors, lawyers. Some people are very vulnerable to and drawn into that core lie of any extremist movement, and that is exactly what we're seeing now with this particular group of Trump supporters.
Wait. American national security official Andy McCabe is telling us they're like ISIS, Islamic State in Syria? Aren't those the wild-eyed lunatics who beheaded journalists and set all those people on fire and then videotaped themselves doing it? Wow, that's terrifying. That's right, Mr. and Mrs. America. What we didn't tell you before was that ISIS was for Donald Trump. That's why they were murdering so many people. They were the Syrian branch of MAGA. You may have heard it was some kind of Islamic thing. Come on. That's racist. It was Donald Trump all along. Now, those people are in this country, in Dallas and Sarasota and Newport Beach, everywhere. They're hiding in plain sight. God knows what they will do next. Actually, we do know. Another 9/11. That's what they're planning. And that's why we need a new 9/11 commission to root them out. But thankfully, Commander Pelosi is planning one right now. Watch.
There is strong interest in the Congress in a 9/11 type commission.
A deep look in a 9/11 style commission to really get to all of what happened.
Yeah, they need a 9/11 type commission of inquiry.
Along the lines of a 9/11 commission.
A 9/11 type commission.
And hopefully an independent 9/11 style commission will look at.
I think this is a big enough threat, an attack on the center of our democracy, that it's going to need a look that spans branches of government, something closer to a 9/11 commission.
Well, I think we know they're on the same email chain, but that doesn't change the substance of what they just told you. Did you hear Jim Comey, another noted moral authority? What Jim Comey told you is that what happened in Washington on January 6th, the Chewbacca guy stumbling around the House floor and all of it, that was this generation's 9/11. And in fact, the magnitude of that atrocity begs for a better name. So from now on, we're going to call it 1/6. And that day will live in infamy for all time. Your grandchildren will get the day off from school every January 6th in remembrance of the horror that took place. In fact, here's a better idea. Let's call it Insurrection Day, because honestly, that's what it was.
The president incited an insurrection against Congress to prevent the peaceful transition of power.
And then he sat back and watched the insurrection.
Insurrection, a violent mob.
A white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection.
An insurrection against our government.
The violent attack on the U.S. Capitol was an act of insurrection.
The insurrection that violated the sanctity of the people's capital.
This was not a protest. This was an insurrection.
Bruce Willis in Insurrection Day. But it's not a joke. According to the Honorable Jim McGovern and everyone else you just saw on the screen, this was not a protest. How dare you call it that? This was an insurrection. Insurrection, insurrection, insurrection. Write that 100 times on the board and don't forget it. INSURRECTION. Insurrection. Learn it. Love it. But you should also know, by the way, for frame of reference, what an insurrection is not. For example, yesterday, 28 people arrested at a violent protest in New York, not on behalf of Donald Trump. Those people attacked police officers. A bunch of them went to jail. But know this. Were they insurrecting at the time? No, they weren't. How do we know they weren't? Because they weren't racists. Only racists can insurrect. Listen carefully to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley explain.
The threat of white supremacy looms large. And it is tragic that it took this insurrection and this attempt to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power and, moreover, injury and loss of life for many to appreciate just how formidable the threat of white supremacy is.
Well, this is a tough one. So what do you do with insurrectionists like that? Insurrectionists who were also white supremacists, as they always are, but not, and here's the tricky part, in some cases even white. So you have non-white white supremacists who insurrect. That's very tough. How do you handle them? Simple force doesn't always work. These are hard cases. You need to re-educate people like that, possibly in camps, re-education camps, if you will. You must deprogram them for the safety of the rest of us. Thankfully, Sandy Cortez has been thinking about this for quite some time. Indeed, since she was a child growing up in leafy Westchester County. Some little girls played with dolls, but Sandy Cortez put her Barbies in a secure enclosure and re-educated them because they were thinking bad things, forbidden things. So Sandy Cortez knows exactly what to do now.
We had a program addressing white supremacists that we had programs, federal programs, that went towards funding organizations like these that de-radicalized people. And President Trump pulled the plug on federal funding for some of these programs. And so one thing that we know is that we have to get that funding right back up, and we probably need to double, triple, quadruple, or increase funding for these de-radicalization programs.
Bad Barbie, bad Barbie, bad Barbie. Those are naughty thoughts. This federal program will deprogram you. So you listen to that and all of this, and you realize the totalitarian instinct is always the same. Always. Only the names of the dictators change. First, you strip people of their right to speak out loud honestly. Then you prevent them from defending themselves and their families. And then, because you now can, you force them at gunpoint to read your catechism, to accept your orthodoxy. You wonder if Sandy Cortez plans to make Trump voters sign written statements affirming they have been deprogrammed. Of course, that's always part of the process. The scary thing is that's where we're heading. Sandy Cortez and her friends are no longer a fringe element within the Democratic Party. Joe Biden ran as a moderate. People voted for him because they thought he was. But Joe Biden's victory was really a victory for Sandy Cortez and that part of the Democratic Party. They are closer now than they've ever been to taking control. The reason for that is very simple. There is a massive power vacuum at the center of this incoming administration, the one that takes power tomorrow. Joe Biden is fading. That is not a personal attack on Joe Biden. It is real. Joe Biden is not capable of running the government or of pushing back against the radicals in his party. The people around Joe Biden know this very well, and that includes people very close to him, including his relatives. People who love Joe Biden were upset when he ran for president. They know he can't do the job, and they are very worried about what happens next. That is not speculation. They have said so out loud. And no honest person in Joe Biden's orbit will deny this.
This is David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK, tweeting, "God bless Tucker Carlson." And here's the white supremacist website Daily Stormer calling Tucker literally our greatest ally. So, what the hell is going on here? Why are white supremacists so excited about Tucker Carlson? In a lot of ways, Tucker is a typical Fox News host. He complains about political correctness, attacks liberal media, interviews Fabio. Okay, that was weird. But what's caught the attention of white supremacists is the way that Tucker talks about immigration. Normally, conservative pundits focus on illegal immigration.
All Americans should welcome legal immigrants, folks who obey our laws and go through the proper procedures.
But Tucker is different. Tucker spent the first few months of his show depicting both legal and undocumented immigrants as potential criminals.
We decided to take a more detailed look at the link between immigrants and crime in this country.
We really don't have good numbers on the crimes committed by immigrants, illegal and otherwise.
He goes after Latinos.
Mexican citizens make up more than 14% of the entire federal prison population.
He goes after Muslims.
Why is violent terrorism an inevitability in Europe? There are a lot of Muslims living in Europe now.
And he goes after refugees.
Who would have thought that all those migrants are having a big effect on the crime rate?
That talking point is, of course, bullshit. Native-born Americans are incarcerated at higher rates than both legal and undocumented immigrants. Cities with high refugee populations typically see their crime rates decrease, and the overwhelming majority of terror attacks in the EU aren't religiously motivated. But that hasn't stopped Tucker from making that myth a central theme on his show.
Foreigners come to our countries and kill our people. You'd think our leaders would blame them, but no, they blame us.
Oof, foreigners.
A hard F.
A hard F.
Carlson's major reason for existing is to create a frame in which immigrants are a grave threat to the survival of America as we know it.
This is Chip Burley. He's a journalist who spent decades studying the language of right-wing extremists.
And that's the classic right-wing populist idea that there's a group of threatening people, they're not like us, and we need to stop them before they stop us.
Tucker obviously isn't the first person to do this. American history is full of demagogues who use the myth of immigrant crime to smear marginalized groups.
Look at the crime rate that's changed in terms of the immigration and the innocent people that are struck down in criminal behavior.
It's a myth that's persisted despite the fact that the crime rate has dropped as more immigrants have come to America. But what makes Tucker different and what makes white supremacists like him so much is that, aside from the haircut, he doesn't look the part of a David Duke. He makes anti-immigrant propaganda look mainstream.
Tucker Carlson is kind of a restatement of all of these things in a kind of neat, well-dressed package.
One of the ways Tucker does this is by cherry picking, focusing on individual stories of immigrant crime to smear immigrants as a whole. In March, for example, Tucker fixated on the story of 2 undocumented immigrants who were accused of raping one of their classmates.
We told you plenty about that horrifying crime in Rockville, Maryland, and why wouldn't we tell you that? It highlights the critical downsides of existing American immigration policy.
It was the perfect Tucker Carlson story because it let him peddle an old-school racist trope about immigrants being rapists without having to actually say it outright.
Why are people embarrassed to point to something that actually happened and draw obvious conclusions from it?
He only had to hint at it.
Sometimes, when foreign countries send the people here, they are not sending their very best.
This whole way of packaging information is designed to give plausible deniability while cementing the bad idea in the minds of the viewers.
That case ended up getting dropped, by the way, after prosecutors found that the facts didn't support the charges. But it didn't matter. Tucker had already made his point. On Twitter, David Duke said Tucker's coverage of the story was one of his best performances.
This is a common trick that demagogues use to shape the already entrenched prejudices of the audience.
Another way Tucker normalizes harmful tropes about immigrants is by inviting anti-immigrant extremists to do his dirty work for him. With the Maryland case, it was people like Ann Coulter.
There are all these Americans who wouldn't have dead children, who wouldn't be raped, but for our immigration policy.
After the terrorist attacks in the UK, it was Katie Hopkins, a woman who literally called for a final solution on Twitter.
A final
solution? Yeah.
People talk about integration. I always hear the word colonization. We have opened our arms and told everyone to come and effectively take over.
It's basically the handing off of the concern to a group of people who are more than happy to take you by the hand and turn it into a fist.
Also, can we talk about the annoying eyebrow thing Tucker does when he's talking to someone he agrees with?
Chosen to join. National flag. I know what they're with Western culture.
He acts like his mind is being blown by the most basic comments. He's doing it right now, isn't he? But the thing white supremacists love most about Tucker Carlson is his rejection of multiculturalism. Tucker argues that the problem with Mexican and Muslim immigrants is that they're not like us. They come from different, inferior cultures.
This is a country founded on European culture. Is the Western civilization we're talking about superior to the culture that these immigrants are bringing?
And Tucker says welcoming those different cultures is making America a worse place to live.
Our leaders worship multiculturalism, so we encourage immigrants to reject our culture because all cultures are equal, except that they're not all equal.
This probably goes without saying, but that's really similar to how white supremacists talk about immigration.
Millions of people crossing our borders illegally and not having the same values that we have and share. Western culture is what we are, and it's about time we in America stood up and defended it.
And Tucker peddles this idea on his show
White men so angry? Seriously, why are white men so angry? You would think that people broke into their houses at midnight, put a gun to their head, and forced them to season some chicken. White men exist in a country where they receive perpetual validation. They run all of the Fortune 500 companies. They are most of our elected officials. They are most of our police officers. Remember that scene in Coming to America where Cleo McDowell discovered that Akeem was actually a prince and had his own money?
The boy has got his own money!
And if you pull out any cash, you will find a white man's face on it. Like, how can you be angry if every time you look at money in your country, your face is on it? America is basically Wakanda for white men. White men are amplified and celebrated and honored so frequently that it is literally news when that honor is extended to someone who is not a white man. Yet despite all of this, they are our angriest firefighters, our angriest accountants, our angriest hipsters, our angriest presidents. And it's like, yo, why the hell are you all so angry? Every week, it seems like there's a new national instance of white men taking their anger out on innocent people. White male anger looks like Dylan Roof. White male anger looks like a police officer shooting Stephon Clark 20 times while he was unarmed in his backyard. White male anger looks like that happening over and over and over and over and over again, where people who are not white men are forced to deal with this anger and are victims of it. And I guess the question isn't so much why white men are so angry, but what is the end game of this anger? What is their ultimate purpose for stockpiling all these weapons? What is their ultimate reasoning for marching with tiki torches on college towns?
You will not replace us!
We know the answers to these questions, which is why when we're asking why are white men so angry, what we're really asking is there a way to insulate ourselves from this anger? And will the anger of white men eventually kill us all?
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist. So I just want y'all to know that up front.
It gladdens me to know that Odin prepares for a feast. The Aesir will welcome me. My death comes without apology. And I welcome the Valkyries to summon me home!